as you're thinking about putting together an advocacy day at the Capitol, I wanted to touch base with you on some pointers as well as what the value of these visits are and why you should definitely participate in them. The first thing that you have to remember is that the business of making laws, the business of making public policy, is a human process. And it's built on three pillars, all interconnected and all equally important. The first is relationships, the second is integrity, and the third is information. Just like any institution and any process, relationships are very important, not only for the people that serve in a legislature, relationships between legislators and so forth, but also the relationship that you have or can develop with them along the way. Integrity is important because obviously people need to trust that the information that you're giving them and that they're hearing from their colleagues or from lobbyists or from you is information that they can take to the bank. I served 14 years in the Ohio legislature, and I probably passed more bills than most people will in a term-limited era. But I'm really most proud of not necessarily any piece of legislation, but the fact that at a certain point in my Senate career, I got to the point where I could stand up on the Senate floor and explain an amendment or a bill to my colleagues and people from both sides of the aisle who I know hadn't read it and didn't really know the finer points of the thing that I was talking about, trusted that the information that I was giving them was good because we had a relationship and because I had established over time that I was a person who could be trusted. The third thing is information. This is the currency of the lawmaking process. A lot of people think it's money. It's actually information. They have to make decisions based on information, and there's no big book of policy issues that they can refer to. There's no legislating for dummies guide. And no one who gets elected to these offices knows everything about everything. They have to get information from different places. They're going to get it from the news. They're going to get it from special interest groups. They're going to get it from lobbyists. And they're going to get it from you, particularly when you are participating in advocacy days. So you're taking time out of your lives, you're taking time out of your work to go to the Capitol or to go to the State House or to City Hall, whether it's live or virtually, and sit down with elected officials or their staff. And you may be thinking to yourself, well, what's the value of this? Does it really matter? And why should I spend my time on it? Well, let's go back to the first pillar, relationship, relationship, relationship. You're building a relationship with that elected official and, importantly, with that staff, which is just as important as the relationship that you're building with that elected official. Because if you're doing it right, you can become a resource for that office, for that elected official, to lean on for information that has to do with the policy issues that you care about. If they can get to the point where they say, hey, that person from Kansas City who's in the REIA out there is somebody that I ought to call and ask about a housing issue or about seller financing, then you've achieved your goal right off the bat. That is the gold standard, to walk away as someone who's in the Rolodex, so to speak, and as someone who can be leaned on by the elected official for accurate information. The second point of value for these visits is that lawmakers need to hear from you, and they need to connect with real people outside the Beltway, outside of the state capitals, outside of City Hall, people who are actually impacted by the policies that they are passing, by the rules that they are implementing. The third thing is that a face-to-face meeting develops trust, and trust in turn develops integrity, which further develops the relationship. Another important benefit of these meetings is that you can avoid being eaten by the process and by your opponents on any particular issue. You may not see what's happening behind the scenes, but I guarantee you the people on the other side of the issue are out working very hard in the opposite direction that you'd like to go. And if you're not in the ear of those legislators, if you are not in their heads, if you are not in front of their staff, putting information in front of them that educates the issue as you see it, then you are running the risk of simply being run over by the process. And sometimes the process gets away from you either way. Sometimes things happen internally among members, deals get cut or something goes in a certain direction, and you don't even know about it because you're not engaged and you're not there part of the conversation. Or somebody from the office doesn't know to pick up the phone and call you and tell you, hey, something's happening in committee here. Want to tell you what it is. Can you give me your reaction or tell us what we should say in response to keep this issue on track? Finally, when you participate in these days and you fast forward through the process, very often you can see tangibly your work pay off. The time that you spent developing that relationship, the time that you spent explaining an issue to an office or to an elected official, you can see it pay off by seeing the public policy that you want become law. So a lot of people ask how these meetings should go. And the first thing I would say is that before you go into any legislative day, an advocacy day where you're going around to offices, it's a good idea to have a pre-briefing meeting with your hired lobbyists or folks from National REIA to make sure that you know what the message of the day is, to make sure you know the latest developments on the ground, and that you have somewhat of a game plan or a script going in that's consistent. So if you have groups going to different offices, everybody's singing from the same hymnal. You need to recognize and respect the time. So you've got the attention of the lawmaker and their staff for a relatively short time, usually about 20 minutes. And it's important to make it pay off. And it's also important to plan how the meeting's going to go out. You want to start with introductions, obviously, get around the room, make sure everybody's identified. Importantly, you want to make personal connections and try to establish a connection with the lawmaker or the staff to the extent that you can. Don't force it. But if you have something in common or you're from an area in common, then you may want to bring that up and try to establish that personal relationship. You want to brief them on the positive impact your industry has on people in the communities. And National REIA has a lot of data that's available in terms of the impact that investors have on our communities and on our economy. And I know that you've got local stories from your home areas about things that you've had a positive impact with in your community, or superstar investors who go above and beyond to build great relationships with investors and help people in tough housing situations. Make sure they know that. Make sure that you're not being defined by the other side. Define yourself in a positive way up front. Then you get into the meat of the discussion. You lay out the relative issue or the ask that you have on the table. You want to present it in a positive way. You want to give accurate and complete info. Remember, going back to that integrity pillar. Know what the other side will say, your opponents in this case, and fashion a positive message with that in mind. But don't be negative. Don't spend a lot of time beating up on the other side. You don't have time for that, and really it's not helpful to the discussion or to the lawmaker. You want to give the lawmaker an action item. You want to ask them to do something. Sometimes a good way to do that is to ask them, after hearing the problem, after hearing your position on things, ask them how they can help you. That kind of enfranchises them and brings them in. Now, sometimes they may not have an idea, or the idea that they have isn't quite what you had in mind going in. So let them talk, and then maybe give them some other ideas. And suggestions would be, obviously, to ask for their vote, yes or no. Ask for a letter of support for your issue. Ask them to speak to their legislative leader or to a committee chair, a key committee chair who is handling this particular issue that you care about. Ask them to convene a meeting of interested parties to work out differences or to try to get a bill unstuck from the process. Ask them to convene a meeting back home, like a town hall, to talk about the issue. Whatever you do, don't leave the meeting without asking them to do something. And during this part of the discussion, you want to let the lawmaker ask questions and give them answers, obviously, but you want to let them talk to the extent that they want to talk. And you want to leave a one-page brief of the issue that's important to you, what you're talking about that day, what the ask is. Also, make sure that you have contact information for the people that should be contacted by the office for clarification or for any other information related to the issue. When the meeting's over, send a thank you note. Yes, send an email to get instant gratification, but also send an actual note in the U.S. mail to make sure that you stay on the radar screen and are associated with this issue that you talked about. You'd be surprised how many staff offices on Capitol Hill and in state capitals have thank you notes pinned up on the bulletin board. So keeping in mind those three pillars of relationships, integrity, and information, and being engaged in these meetings can go a long way to seeing success in your legislative agenda. And I think you'll be surprised at the impact that you can have at a very personal level. Now, a lot of this may sound like inside the beltway stuff, and you know what? It is. This process is human, it's messy, it's ugly, but it's also beautiful and it works. And it takes you, and it takes the information that you can provide lawmakers to make it work. So dive in and go make a difference.